If you've been scrolling through endless lists of SSDs, weighing capacity against price, and still feel which one actually makes sense, anxiety, you're not alone. I've been there, staring at spec sheets for hours, wondering whether a massive 7TB drive is overkill or exactly what my Synology NAS needs. Link is in the description if you want to check the product details on Amazon. Let's cut through the noise. The Synology 2.5-inch Enterprise SATA SSD, model SAT5210 7TB, is purpose-built for Synology NAS units that support the SAT5210 series. That means it isn't a generic off-the-shelf drive you can drop into any PC. It's engineered to work hand-in-hand with the DSM operating system, the storage pooling logic, and the health monitoring tools that Synology provides. If you own a DS1621 Plus, DS1821 Plus, or any of the newer rack units that list this SSD on their compatibility chart, you've already cleared the biggest hurdle: hardware fit. Why does that matter? In real-world deployments, you quickly discover that a mismatched SSD can cause the NAS to flag unsupported drive errors, refuse to build a RAID, or even stall during firmware upgrades. The Synology branded SSD eliminates that risk because the firmware talks the same language as the NAS controller. For small to medium businesses that rely on uninterrupted backup windows, that peace of mind is worth a premium. Now, who should actually consider spending on a 7TB SATA SSD? Picture a boutique video production shop that edits 4K footage directly from a shared storage pool. Those editors need massive sequential reads and writes, but they also need the data to stay online 24/7 without the latency spikes you sometimes see with consumer-grade drives. A 7TB capacity means the whole project library can sit on one drive, simplifying backup strategies and avoiding the overhead of managing multiple smaller units. Another scenario is a surveillance system with dozens of IP cameras streaming 1080p footage around the clock. Storing a month-long archive on a single, high-capacity SSD reduces the number of spindles you have to monitor, and the SATA interface provides enough sustained throughput for the constant write load. On the flip side, if your primary use case is a home media server that streams a few movies to a couple of tablets, you're likely overpaying. A 4TB SATA SSD or even a high-capacity HDD could handle that workload at a fraction of the price. The same goes for hobbyists who are just experimenting with a Synology unit for personal file sync. In those cases, the extra capacity and enterprise warranty become less relevant, and the cost per gigabyte starts to feel unjustified. Speaking of cost, the biggest practical trade-off with this drive is that SATA, while reliable, can't match the raw numbers of an NVMe SSD. In a lab test, you'd see lower IOPS and slightly slower random reads, which matters if your NAS is running a heavy database or virtualization workload with many tiny file operations. In my own consulting gigs, the only time I've seen SATA become a bottleneck is when a client runs dozens of Docker containers that each spin up small log files every second. For most file server, backup, or media editing scenarios, the SATA bandwidth is more than adequate, and the drive's enterprise endurance rating means it can handle the write-heavy patterns typical of those jobs. Another hidden factor is the 5-year warranty that Synology backs this SSD with. That isn't just a marketing line, it translates into a real safety net for businesses that can't afford sudden drive failure. When a drive is covered for half a decade, the total cost of ownership drops because you avoid emergency replacements, data recovery services, and the downtime associated with a sudden loss of storage. In environments where the NAS is part of a larger IT infrastructure, that warranty can be a decisive factor. What about installation and day-to-day handling? The 2.5-inch form factor slots into the standard drive bays of supported Synology models, so there's no need for adapters or custom mounting brackets. The drive powers up instantly and appears in DSM's Storage Manager as a Synology-optimized SSD, letting you enable features like SSD cache or tiered storage with a couple of clicks. I've seen it paired with a slower HDD tier, where the SSD handles hot data while the HDD stores the cold archive. The result is a noticeable speed boost for file access without having to invest in a full-blown all-flash array. Now, let's talk about a couple of practical weaknesses that tend to get glossed over. First, the drive's price per terabyte is still high compared to traditional enterprise HDDs. If you're building a petabytescal archival system, you'll end up spending a lot more for the same raw capacity. Second, because it's a SATA drive, you're limited to the maximum throughput of the SATA 3 interface, about 600 megabytes per second theoretical. If your NAS has multiple 10 GB ports and you're moving large video files across the network, you might not see the full benefit of the SSD's internal speed because the network becomes the bottleneck. Finally, should you skip this SSD? If your NAS is older and only supports SATA, you won't get the advertised speeds and the warranty might not apply. Also, if your